And good evening and welcome to TBNK Spotlight. And the topic tonight is, where do I vote? And I'm glad to be here with our guest tonight, Gabe Summey, who is the county clerk for Kenton County and doing an outstanding job, I might say.
Thank you.
And my name is Dick Murgatroyd, and tonight we're going to talk a little bit about where do you vote, and we're going to talk about some of the things that created all the changes that are going to be happening for you as the voter in this election. So it's important that you find out what those changes are and how they impact you, so that you don't miss your opportunity to vote. And the best place to do that, there's a website that they can go to. Gabe, what is it?
Well, they call it the VIC, and it was actually produced by the Secretary of State's office. But we have the link, I believe, will be shown on the show. But you can get to that either through the front page of my particular website, or the fiscal court, the Kenton County Fiscal Court's website has that link there. And when you get to that, you'll be able to put in your first name. I'd leave out my middle name, put your last name in there, your date of birth, and it will then give you that information about where you actually do vote.
Because there are a lot of changes this year.
Yes, a great deal of changes.
And I guess that's a good place for us to start. It all begins now, and there's two things we're going to kind of hit on tonight. One is reapportionment. We're going to be speaking a little bit about that, and also about redistricting.
Yes.
So, and to a lot of people, they don't really care. You know, what are those? Who cares? But I think it helps people to understand why every 10 years they go through this.
Yes.
Because and it does confuse people, because some people have been going to the same precinct for 10 years and voting in the same place, and all of a sudden, now you're going to tell them, no, that's not necessarily your precinct. Let's start with the reapportionment. Tell me, what does that mean? What is reapportionment? What are we talking about there?
Well, the federal government, as well as your state governments, are required to do a census every 10 years. And the reason that's important is because they need to define how many people are within a county. And when they do that, that helps them decide how much representation needs to be, is required for that larger or smaller group of people when you come to the state legislatures. So they have to define exactly how many people are in this precinct, or actually within the county itself, so that you can define how many people should be in a precinct, how many people are represented, and that way they feel like there's enough representation in Frankfort as well as in the federal government as well.
And it also even applies to the locally to a degree.
Yes.
Because depending on the kind of government you have, it's every 10 years, and the last one was in 2011. So, and it showed our population was, what is it?
It's currently 100. Well, as of the 2011 census, it's 158,729 people, and because Kenton County has a fiscal court, and that fiscal court has 3 commissioners, then our office, the clerk's office, works with the commissioners to redistribute those numbers, those values, so that they're more equally proportioned throughout the county. And we lost a great deal of population in the northern part of the county, meaning Covington and Ludlow and Bromley, but places like Independence and the south of the county really gained a lot of population, so you have to look at all those factors.
So it changed the balance considerably.
Yes.
And the reapportionment actually starts in your office.
Yes.
That's your responsibility, basically.
We receive from the Secretary of State's office, actually the State Board of Elections, a breakdown telling us what our population is, and then what that population distribution has changed from. Then we take that information, work with the actual 3 commissioners. They get to appoint somebody to this committee, and we look at trying to figure out how do we break up that 158,000 in equal 3 proportions, and we get to have about a 7% variance. So some might have a little bit more than others, but we have to get as close to that as possible. Once that's done, then the fiscal court has to approve that plan, and then that plan would be implemented after the redistricting, which is the next part of the
Which we'll
process.
talk a little bit later on that. Because with regard to the commissioners, the commissioner has to run from a particular district. They have to live in that particular district to run.
Correct.
But then they are voted on by the entire county.
Yeah, and that is not unique to Kenton County. That's actually a statewide issue because you don't always have a commissioner-based fiscal court. There are also magistrate-based.
Right, and those are very different.
They're very different. So we have a commissioner-based. So the defining of the lines of the new districts and the volume really is only helping determine who can run in that particular district.
Right.
They have to live in that district. But the county as a whole, every citizen gets to vote on every one of those three commissioners.
Commissioners, yeah. Which I guess explains why sometimes some of the commissioner districts seem larger
Yes.
area-wise because of the fact that the population, just because you're trying to keep the population balanced.
Yes.
And so I know a lot of times, back when I ran and with fiscal court, I ran for fiscal court, I think, and lost, but wasn't the first time. But I think a lot of people always question and say, well, how come that district's bigger? I mean, why is it a bigger area? But area had nothing to do with it.
No, and interestingly enough, if you look at it on a map, it goes independent number, well, the first district is mainly Covington, then the south of the county is actually District 2, and then you come back up for District 3. So the land, when you're redistributing, has to be contiguous. So I can't pick a little bit of Erlanger or a little bit of Villa Hills or a little bit of the south of the county. They all have to touch all the way down. And that's part of the rules for reapportionment.
And then once it's done, then you can't make any changes.
No, everything must be on hold. It's been approved. And that makes things difficult for people when you get time to wanting to run for a race because that's been approved. But if somebody now is in a district and they want to run for commissioner, they have to make sure that the redistricting won't affect the reapportionment so that they know that they have the ability to actually file for that specific race.
Yeah, 'cause I think we ran into that in the last election where several people had already, and I mean, I think more it was the state level than it was local. But I think that some folks had decided to run and then found out that they were not in the district they thought they were going to be in.
Redistricting and reapportionment basically are the same thing. They just use the word reapportionment as it applies to your commissioner-based environments and your magistrate-based environments, whereas redistricting is really a county-wide, more legislative correction.
Right, and for congressional and legislative.
Yes, in essence, they're exactly the same thing.
Yeah, but the reapportionment comes from you, or starts with you, and the fiscal court. And the redistricting, and I think that's what we'll get into in the next segment.
Well, and with the reapportionment, the interesting thing, as I said, you can vote on them, or the commissioners as a whole in the county. It's not the same for the constables and the magistrates. Not only do those people have to live within their district boundaries to run for that race, only the people in those districts can actually vote on those people.
On those people, and that comes from the state.
Yes, that's a statutory requirement.
That's a statutory requirement.
Yes.
We'll get into the redistricting, and I think it's a good time for us to probably break, and then we'll come back and pick up on redistricting and find out what fun you had with the redistricting.
Thank you.
We'll be right back with TBNK Spotlight. Where do I vote? Stay with us.
Many people feel that once they've voted, they've done their civic duty.
But that's just a start. Voting is important.
But for democracy to work well, people need to stay involved.
We all need to vote, stay informed about public issues, contact elected officials, and get involved in our communities.
Our democracy might have its flaws,
But it demands participation to remain responsive. As Justice Brandeis once said,
the only title in our democracy superior to that of president is the title of citizen.
And welcome back to TBNK Spotlight. Where do I vote? That's a good question. Going to be a big question for many of you, as we said earlier, because this year is a lot of big changes. I'm Dick Murgatroyd, and our guest is Gabe Summey, who has all the answers. She is the Kenton County Clerk, and she can tell you exactly what's going to happen. And in fact, she can tell us right now where they can go.
Yes.
We'll remind them. A website they can go to that will give them the exact answer as to where they can vote.
There is a website that was developed by the Secretary of State. They call it the VIC. It's basically the Voter Information Center. I know that they will be streaming the actual website address because it's quite long. The other places people can go are the front page of my county clerk website and the fiscal court website, or just go to the Secretary of State's website. And you can go on there. Just make sure you put on your first name. I recommend people leave out their middle name. Put in your last name, your date of birth, and it's excellent information because it gives you not only where you're supposed to vote, it even gives you the ability to map it and tell you who you are going to be voting for, which House district, which representative, and you can even hit a part that says sample ballots so you can see the ballots before that day as well.
That's a good point you just bring up. Will it change for some people because of the changes in precincts and voting places in the precincts? Will that change some of the people that they'll be able to vote for?
Yes.
This time?
House Bill 1 that was approved on August the 23rd of last year in 2013 basically, and to simplify things, went down the middle of Dixie Highway. And whereas before you had House districts next to each other like this, they're now on top of each other or underneath each other. So,
which is a big change.
Which is a big change. And sometimes that didn't really change where people were going to vote, but it did change who they're going to vote for. So not only do I want people to go to the Voter Information Center to make sure they know exactly where they're supposed to be that day, but if they really are interested in what changes have happened to them as far as their ballot's concerned and who they get to vote for, that's the best place to check.
Yeah, but because that will be confusing for some if they thought they were going to vote for, because the person they may have voted for the last time around may not be the candidate this time.
Correct.
For them, especially at the state level.
And interestingly enough, none of the House or Senate candidates will have any competition this year. So most of the time, that's not going to be an issue coming the general election, but it will change from this point forward for the future if anybody does have any competition in those races.
It will change. Well, redistricting, and that came out, and we talked a little bit about that. Redistricting comes from the state. That's a legislative process.
Correct.
And I was fortunate enough to be involved in that when I was in the House. That was the last time I think they did it. And it was... And it's always House Bill 1, I guess, they always call it that. And this time, they did it once, and that was declared unconstitutional by the courts. Yes. They had to go back and do it again. The tendency, I think, sometimes is that, the legislators tend to try to help themselves out as best they can, or their party.
Correct.
And see if they can kind of get those districts to jerry-rig those districts. And it was interesting because they would come up with some really strange districts that had no, how they did that, it just was amazing. And there was some up here. There was, I remember one House district up here that covered, I think, 3 counties.
Yes.
They were trying desperately to change that district and discourage that representative from running again. But it covered 3. It was crazy. And I think it even passed. But that comes. Talk a little bit about that. It does come from the state level.
Right, and they take the census, which again is 158,729 people here, and determine whether we are being properly represented, if we have the correct number of House of Representatives, and we have enough senators. And in this case, basically the end result was we lost the 11th senatorial district, which actually makes it a little easier because you don't have so many ballot changes. But then we gained a House in the south of the county, the 61st district, and that actually came up from Scott County into the bottom of Kenton County and really worked its way up into the bottom of Independence as well.
Well, and I think at one time they were trying to try to keep counties whole.
Yes.
Because in some cases, I know we had some situations where we had, I think Dick Roding's seat, as a matter of fact, was just a few precincts in Kenton County, and the rest of it was in Boone County.
That's actually what was gotten rid of, was the 11th, what they call Dick Roding's finger that came in from Boone County. That's actually been eliminated.
Yeah, because, I think it does, I think, make sense to a degree. I think you're especially at the state level, when you're crossing in county lines, there's so many different issues between the counties. It was tough on legislators, I think, so it makes sense to try to keep them within the boundaries if you can, although you can't always do that.
And they give us a really long list of how they break up the percentages. And so the problem is that instead of taking whole precincts, which they did with the senatorial districts, in the House of Representatives, when they adjusted all of the numbers, they actually went with census blocks. So sometimes whole precincts went to a House of Representative, or they would take a portion or even a fraction of a census. And that made for some very interesting results when you're looking at adjusting precincts to meet this House bill requirements.
Now, is that done at the state level, or is that something you have to get into up here?
All the county clerks are responsible for the distribution of, or I should say the maintenance of the precincts and their boundaries. So once that information is decided, it's passed, the House bill's passed, we then have to look and see what changes that made to our precincts and then modify them accordingly. Of course, there's a statute that specifically tells us when we do that, we can only have one House district, one congressional district, and one senatorial district. And I also look at the school boards because it makes for a very confusing ballot. And of course, by law, I can't cross those lines. Only one of those, each of those races can be on a ballot for that particular precinct.
Yeah, because so you can't cross over the lines on that.
No.
For sure. That's something we want to talk a little bit more about, because I know that there's some strange districts. I noticed just in this information we got where part of that precinct doesn't really have any voters, or
Yes.
And you have some kind of a interesting concept there. So let's talk about that when we come back, and we will be right back right after this message.
Don't we all agree?
We desperately need the bridge.
No way. No bridge. It'll lower the value of my property.
The bridge will help get our kids to school with less danger, quicker, and back home before dark.
Crime, riffraff, smog, and pollution, noise is what the bridge will bring.
Nobody agrees with you. You're out of touch.
Listen, everyone I know is against the bridge.
In a nation that's supposed to be united, it's sometimes hard to imagine that we don't always all agree.
Everyone wants the bridge.
No one wants the bridge.
My legislator better vote right.
American democracy.
Don't we all agree?
Learn how you can make American democracy stronger. Log on to www.representativedemocracy.org.
Welcome back to TBNK Spotlight. Where do I vote? I'm Dick Murgatroyd. We're with Gabe Summey, who is clerk of county clerk, rather, for Kenton County. And we're talking about what some of the changes that you're going to experience this year for the first time in 10 years as far as where you go to vote. And we're going to help you find that as best we can. We talked about, we left talking about a little bit about redistricting, and I know you said we started out with 108 precincts. Tell us some of the major changes that happened with that redistricting this time.
Well, we had 108 precincts, and then the redistribution forced me to look really hard at a lot of the different numbers of voters that were in a precinct, the percentage of people that actually come out to vote, and also the changes that were required by House Bill 1. So I technically, based on a lot of those factors, eliminated 8 precincts Basically, they either were merged into another precinct. That's the majority of how that works. And I ended up, though, with the House bill, creating 7 new ones. Some of those changes were due to the fact that, like, Independence 11 and Nicholson 3 that I created were due to the fact that there was such a very high volume of registered voters. So to make it more efficient for them, I basically cut those in half to even out the numbers. But I also created precincts that had no voters. Crescent Springs 3.5 and Fort Wright 4.5, based on the census blocks and the way that House bill distributed those census. The only way to really follow the law was to create precincts with no voters. I also ended up creating voters, or I should say precincts, with less than 100 voters. There's 3 of those. They're easy to identify. They all have 0.5 after them. They're kind of fractional precincts. And I'm able to not create a new polling location for them. I can use the existing location so people won't be confused. They still go to their same location. They're just going to be going to a different roster. And anybody who's been moved should receive a postcard in the mail telling them not just the name of their precinct, the precinct location, and the address. I suggest they hold on to that postcard so when they go into a location, and several locations have more than one precinct, there will be brand new signs on the tables or near the machinery that will let them know that's the table that they are intended to go to. They'll be in that roster book. Make sure they have their ID ready and they can sign and get their ballot.
While we're on that, in the remaining minutes we have, what are some of the differences that they may experience this time and when they go in to vote? I mean, other than the fact that sometimes they're going to begin going in and there's going to be 2 precincts in that one voting location.
Right, and as in the past, currently we have an e-scan, which is the paper ballot machines, and the e-slate, which is the electronic machine. We have each one of those machines in every precinct. So if you prefer a paper ballot or just a computerized version, that's fine. When you go up to the table, you let the clerk know as you're signing in. And at that point in time, you go ahead and vote and you're good to go. So as far as the changes, we want to just make it simpler by identifying your table easier, making sure you've got that postcard so you know where to vote. And then also, once you get there, knowing the procedures that you will need to do, and that's why it's so important that people go to that voter information center. And if they can't or don't have a computer to check that, I would really love for people to call my office, which is 392-1620, which is the voter registration office number.
So there's no reason why folks will not be able to figure out where they're supposed to go. And I understand, because a lot of people are creatures of habit and they've been going to the same place for a long time.
Right.
And we don't want them to go out and go to that place and not be able to vote and then give up and go home. So I think I want to emphasize, I think with everything, all the work you've done and all the changes that are being made, that don't let that be discouraging to folks to go out and vote. This election is extremely important, especially they tend to, I think sometimes they don't vote in primaries. I mean, they tend to think they're not important, but they are important because in many cases, that primary is the election.
Particularly this year.
Yeah.
A majority of the countywide races will be decided in the primary alone.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think that's the key. We just want people to make sure you do get out and vote. And I think, as we said earlier in the program, you may want to double check the ballot for your new precinct, right, because it may have changed as far as the people that you're going to be voting for.
I have sample ballots on the very front page of my website, and in a primary, because of Kentucky's setup, there will be Democratic ballots, Republican ballots, and the nonpartisan.
Good.
I really believe people should take the time to look.
They really should.
So that they know, because we do have very complicated ballots in Kentucky, well, actually in Kenton County, and that's due to the fact that we have technically 19 cities. I'm including Walton in that. We have a lot of unincorporated areas, so you have to know if you're inside the city limits or not, because you can only vote on city issues if you're within the city. We also have 5 school boards. Now, those races won't be till the fall, but it does make for a much more complicated ballot. So I need people to know, this is what I'm supposed to be voting on, and take the time to look at the sample ballots. That also makes it a whole lot easier that day when someone hands it to you. You
Right.
kind of know what you're looking. Now, sample ballots will be at all the locations, so people have an opportunity to look at them. But it's always nice to
But
have
it
that
helps
in hand.
if you've done it ahead of time.
Yes.
I thank you very much. It's been most interesting. It really has been. I enjoyed it.
Really just want people to have a smooth, easy, efficient opportunity to go vote. I really don't want people to be frustrated. No. I'd rather have 1,000 phone calls than people not have the opportunity to vote, because it's such an important right here in the United States.
It really is. Well, thank you. Thanks for all the hard work you do.
It's lovely seeing
You're the
you.
best.
Thank you so much.
You really are. Really. And thank you for joining us for TBNK Spotlight. Where do I vote? And I hope by now that you've learned a lot from this half hour that we've done that will help you to have a better experience and a better voting experience, and that by all means that you're going to go out and make sure you do vote this time. Thanks for being with us. I'm Dick Murgatroyd. See you next time.